Thanks, but we the people will do the fact-checking. Hello everyone, this is Annette Rivers, and I want to talk to you today about not giving your power away, but instead empowering yourself and the people you know to do their own fact-checking. In case you haven't noticed, there's been a bit of hand-wringing lately about the current decentralization of media power. An increasing amount of the American people, not to mention the global population, is turning away from the small group of media conglomerates that have been the dominant source of news for decades. In doing so, this growing number of Americans are turning away from a cultural space where for many years everyone tended to agree on what the facts were. And people are turning instead towards alternative and independent media outlets that offer a broader variety of perspectives and that frankly cover a lot of news that never makes the mainstream sphere. Because of this trend, there's been fearful, doom-ridden predictions about the future of America in a post-truth society, where no one knows what real news is anymore. These gloomy predictions portray an increasingly fragmented culture where everyone retreats to their own womb of reality, rejecting news they don't like as fake and believing news they do like with unfailing conviction. The hand-wringers predict that charismatic deceivers will enter this environment, plugging themselves into our umbilici at will and nourishing us with poisonous ideologies that will ultimately be the undoing of the civilized world. While such fears are not entirely without merit, people do tend to seek out news that confirms their biases. There seems to be a disconnect in the mind of those who do most of the hand-wringing. I'm talking about the very members of the media establishments that the public is turning away from. These hand-wringers persist in believing that fake news is out there somewhere, generated by pimply, basement-dwelling Russian teenagers or by Twitter-using despots, and infecting the feeble-minded public consuming it. These media elites seem to be unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that fake news has long taken up residence in their own houses as well. But those of us who seek out alternative news are quite aware that fake news and propaganda are generated as much on mainstream outlets as in the alternative media. We know this because the increasing prevalence of cell phone cameras, video platforms, and whistleblowing outlets has ripped away the curtain of respectability cloaking mainstream media and revealed to us the lying, spinning, and negligent fact-checking that is practiced regularly by establishment outlets. We are also aware, of course, that lying, spinning, and outright fake journalism is out there in the alternative spheres. No one's disputing this. But here's the thing. The same mechanisms that hold mainstream outlets accountable for deception and negligence also hold alternative sites accountable, and those are the mechanisms that are being censored. For example, in May of this year, a highly redacted FBI memo began to circulate on the internet, purportedly linking Seth Rich to the DNC email link. Almost immediately, WikiLeaks denounced the memo as a fake. Similarly, a YouTube journalist recently exposed CNN for orchestrating a fake Muslim vigil honoring the Manchester bombing. Neither incident necessarily invalidates the larger stories behind them, of course. A fake memo doesn't mean that the Seth Rich murder doesn't merit investigation, and a fake Muslim vigil doesn't mean that there aren't real Muslims who are legitimately horrified by the Manchester bombing. But what both incidents do demonstrate is that it's largely the alternative media sphere, not the mainstream, that keeps both spheres accountable. So when politicians, university elites, and social media giants begin collaborating to censor and marginalize alternative news, allegedly to protect the public from fake news, we see very clearly what's really happening. We understand that these forces are attempting to censor the whistleblowers who are exposing the propaganda, and we know that these forces are more interested in controlling the flow of information than in helping the American people discern the truth. If these establishment guardians are really concerned about the public being affected by fake news, then why aren't they encouraging us to use our critical thinking skills? Why aren't they empowering us to discern for ourselves what is and isn't fake news? Why aren't these elites acknowledging that fake news and propaganda is promulgated as much in establishment outlets as it is in alternative and independent outlets, if not more? Instead, they give us lists of fake news sites that they have compiled and direct us to fact-checking sites that they write and edit. They even give us browser plugins that allegedly flag fake news. Consider this article by factcheck.org, How to Spot Fake News, which seems to be offering advice that will empower its readers to become more adept at recognizing fake news. but a closer look reveals mostly disingenuous and disempowering advice that steers its readers away from using true critical thinking skills. There's a general implication that the best way to avoid fake news is to identify fake or inferior news sites rather than diving into the content of a news story and evaluating its merits through logic and critically sound questions. This advice insidiously encourages readers to mistrust perspectives that come from lesser-known sources and to lend more validity to perspectives that come from trusted or establishment outlets without actually examining the merits of the story. For example, the article cautions readers to beware of clone sites like abcnews.com.co, not actually associated with ABC News, and satire sites like The Onion. Not bad advice in of itself, but there's no acknowledgement that fake news can be found on well-established outlets as well. The article goes on to advise readers to check the sources cited in news stories, which again appears to be good advice on the surface. I would always recommend checking the sources cited. But every single example of bad sourcing mentioned is from a totally bogus or satirical site. Now, I may not be a professional journalist, but I find this kind of advice disingenuous and frankly insulting. The truly beneficial and honest advice that's missing from the article, and so many others like it, is that any journalist can create fake or dishonest news, and that all journalists should be fact-checked, even the ones that appear to be reputable. Here's a little secret factcheck.org doesn't want you to know. Fact checkers are just journalists, and like all journalists, they're susceptible to bias, lies of omission, and bad sourcing. They don't acknowledge that a lot of what fact-checking sites do is subjective analysis, what some would call punditry, rather than straightforward fact-checking. If they did make such an acknowledgement, I would be really impressed. Imagine if factcheck.org or Snopes or PolitiFact would preface their articles with a statement like, "Hey, we've done some research for you, and this is our opinion, but please don't take our word for it. Consider our arguments and our evidence and make up your own mind. If you have any questions or information that would make our work more complete, please submit in the comments below." But they don't say that. Instead, they say things like this. "We know you're busy, and some of this debunking takes time, but we get paid to do this kind of work. Between factcheck.org, Snopes.com, the Washington Post Fact Checker, and PolitiFact.com, it's likely at least one has already fact-checked the latest viral claim to pop up in your news feed." Again, what they say is partly true. Of course, it takes too much time to debunk every news story out there. Nobody has time to do that. But the idea that the solution to such time constraints is for the people to surrender their own judgment and just believe what the fact checkers tell them is ludicrous. If all of us just picked one or two news stories a week and took a few minutes to do some cursory research, we would all become much more adept at recognizing deception, propaganda, and fake news with very little effort. It's quite easy to go to the actual source rather than having to accept a journalist's analysis of evidence. If an article cites data from, say, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Pew Research Center, or the Department of Justice, or the FBI, it's often a simple step to go to the actual organization and look at their research. And you don't have to be a data analysis expert, I promise. Generally, there's an article or an abstract describing the findings of the research and describing how evidence was gathered and what criteria was used. The more you do this kind of research, which again is just a few clicks here and there, a Google search here and there, the better you'll get at asking the right questions, and more importantly, the better you'll get at recognizing deceptive or lazy journalism. The fearful rhetoric about fake news and the impossibility of knowing what's true and what isn't true is mostly unfounded. Just look for the evidence. If there isn't any evidence, or if the evidence is questionable, unnamed anonymous sources, bad research, or document that hasn't been verified, then a journalist who presents that story as fact is being disingenuous. All I would ask of any American who cares about the future of this country is to be a citizen and take a few minutes a week to research the news you're consuming. We're blessed, honestly, to live in a country where we have the freedom not only to do the research, but to report what we find. That's not the case in much of the world, even so-called Western democracies. I could go off on a long tangent about what's happening in the UK and Germany right now, but maybe in another video. I'd like to invite you to pick one story a week, just one, and whether you're a liberal or a conservative, be willing to check out a story that challenges your views. If you only consume news from mainstream sources, I would really invite you to check out the alternative sphere. Just poke around on YouTube even. There's so much out there that isn't covered in the mainstream sphere. Go to a source that you hate, even if you have to hold your nose. Go to a source that you love. Be willing to be a little uncomfortable. Question everything you read. Again, of course, this is just an invitation. I would never tell you to avoid any news source or outlet, and I would caution you to be suspicious of anyone who does. I would rather encourage everyone to start using their own minds and skills to figure out the truth for themselves. Don't give your power away. Don't let anyone else decide for you what is and isn't fake. Decide for yourself. This is an incredibly powerful time in the world because we, the ordinary people, are the journalists now. We're the gatekeepers. There is no other to interpret reality for us unless we let them. For better or worse, the spread of powerful technologies and platforms have allowed the people of the world to hold their media corporations and governments accountable, and have forced the media to provide actual evidence for what they're reporting. Don't let anyone else tell you what is and isn't true, and don't let anyone tell you that the common people aren't capable of discernment. That's a fear mindset, and a bigotry of low expectations we should all refuse to accept. All right, everyone, God bless, and have a beautiful day.